Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Welcome to the 2022 Project Orchids, and this will be the first video in the set, and it will be for Group 1, the initial look. And in this video we will look at 3 orchids and benchmark them effectively. Let's see what they look like at the start of the season and what I would expect from them over the next couple of months. So let's start with the first 3. Okay, orchid number 1 is Dendrobium Nester, and as you can see it doesn't really fit on the backdrop very well. The backdrop is taller than it is wide, and that's the shape of this orchid. It's tall and not very wide, so it's not going to... Okay, we've got gaps at the end of the backdrop. Tough, that's all I can do. Now basically Nester is a primary cross. It's a cross between Purpurata and an osmum, I believe. And as such it needs a much drier, slightly cooler, very bright winter rest to bloom at its best. But the first thing you need to appreciate with these types of long cane orchids is to bloom at their best you need to grow the long canes. That's your job in the growing season. So we're working back to front here, and if you have a look at the canes I grew last year, I didn't do that job very well, and the reason was there was a break. This plant got remounted, and as such it had some major root disturbance, which basically stunted it for that particular year. You can see the normal length of the canes here, and these are the 2 canes from last year. This little one and this one a bit longer. But they weren't even long enough to gain enough weight to become pendulous, which is its natural growth habit. Now this little plant here was a kiki that was taken off. Already that's showing signs of a new growth. That's good. So that means that will grow and produce a cane. It probably won't be full length, but it will also produce roots. That's the important bit. And that's the goal for this plant this year, is to establish a decent root system like it had before, and get some new growths going. We may only get 1, we may get 2. So basically that's the expectations for this plant. But the first thing we can expect is for it to bloom. Now it always blooms on the previous year's growths, and they are normally leafless by the time that happens, which is virtually true apart from this one, which is just hanging on for dear life. So we have got nubbins progressing on the canes here. The nubbins appear opposite where the leaf was, so alternately down the cane. Very rarely the absolute full length of the cane, but if you look at my previous efforts, you've got nubbins from here right back to here, whereas this time on this shorter cane they only go back to here, and I don't believe we're going to get a good blooming this year. But we have got a few nubbins on this cane as well, so we will get blooms on both canes. It's not going to be a spectacle like it was last year, but what I'm after this year is new growths, new root system and progress. And there are 2 schools of thought with these types of orchids. Some say you shouldn't start feeding or watering until the new growths start. If you do that and it blooms prior to that, then you will drain the resources of the plant. Some also say there are plenty of enough resources in the plant to be able to bloom without starting the feeding. I like to think that by starting the feeding and watering once the buds progress, these are not that I'm not feeding this one yet. This is getting a dribble of water now and again. It's still resting as far as I'm concerned. These little nubbins will eventually push away from the cane, so at the moment they look alongside. They will eventually turn around like that, and then you'll see the buds forming at the end. That's the point where I start feeding. and we will do so and we'll see what we get. There's a tiny little kiki on the end of that cane that I don't think is going to grow, because that's the cane I'm going to take off. Yeah, there is no life left in that. It's dry and shriveled and it's ugly, so this one will come off. The other four will stay. They are reserves. So I thought I saw a bud then. They are reserves, so they will stay and feed and store nutrients and hydration for the plant. Yeah, they will help it grow this year by supplying reserves. If you get a plant like this that ends up with too many of the canes like this, you end up losing some of your vigor for the plant, because you can only put so much nutrients into the plant. Yeah, and if a lot of those keep topping up this area, they're not being used to grow. So there comes a time when the older canes need thinning out. On this plant, not yet. Okay, so expectations for this: hopefully new growths both from the kiki and from the main plant, the mother plant, and a new set of roots from both. And hopefully this year we get full-size canes again. So that's number one. Okay, plant number two is an Aliceara. So one of the something in the Oncidium alliance this time, an intergeneric. What went into this, I haven't got a clue. And the chances are it would be difficult to find out, and I just can't be bothered. All I know is that it's an intergeneric. It may have Oncidium in it, I don't know. But with the reclassifications of so many in the Oncidium alliance, names like Aliceara might not even be true anymore, because if a component part has been reclassified, then the name doesn't work, because it becomes meaningless. But it's an intergeneric, that's all I need to know. And I've been trying to rescue this plant for about 3 years, which is why I've picked on it, because it does look like it's responding at long last. Now, what we've got are some reasonably plump bulbs, many leaves, and quite a few new growths. If you look round the back of the plant, there's 2 new growths there. And coming round here, we've got another new growth pushing on quite nicely. And then right up the side here, we have another one. So we've got 4 new growths on this plant at the moment, and those will produce roots. And therein lies something that must be done this time round. The moss is old and tired and is zombie moss. Therefore, after the age that this has been on this mount, that zombie moss has gone off. It's probably quite acidic. Now, luckily, it dries fast because it's on a mount, so it can't be doing as much damage to the root system as it would be in a pot. Nonetheless, the new roots that are going to come from these new growths, I want in some new live moss. So I will be doing some work on this plant. I will leave it on its mount, probably, decision not made yet, and I will tease all of this old moss off and then surround the base of the plant, up in between the pseudo bulbs, round the back with some nice live moss strapped on in such a way that the roots will go straight into it. So that's the plan for this one, and I really would like to see some blooms from at least one of these new growths. As I say, it hasn't been doing very well for some time now. Hopefully this is the year it picks up and gets going again. So plans for this one: deal with the moss, set up a decent base for the new roots to get into with live moss, and get this one to grow and hopefully to bloom. So that's plant number 2. Okay, and plant number 3, the last one in this group, Lalia purpurata variety striata. A large Lalia. I've got this one potted in bark in a holy clay pot. This one suffered from the root issues with the Cattleyas, where I tried to treat them for scale and got it totally wrong and destroyed a lot of my root systems. So many of my Cattleyas are in a state of recovery. This one didn't fare too bad as far as the roots were concerned, but nonetheless it was still a problem. And what happened with this was it lost a lead, so it ended up not blooming. So this was the lead that it grew, this large one here, but no sheath, therefore no blooms. It started this growth back at the beginning of the winter, and it got to about there and stalled completely, and I didn't believe it was going to grow. Well, it has decided to grow. It is pushing on now. Whether it gets up to full size or not, I don't know. We've got signs of root growth at the base of that particular growth. Then a second plant, this is in two pieces, is this piece here, which is basically smaller and has less strength in it because it's got a pseudo bulb with no leaf here. That is an odd shape as well. So this one is also an odd shape, but it has a good leaf. And then this one, not too bad. And then what was the new growth at that time, pushed on, very, very thin at the base, not very strong, but did produce a leaf. Now, in theory, this should produce a new growth. And with the new growth, like on the other one, we should get some new roots when it gets to about half size, because this piece hasn't got very good roots. But it has got some branching roots down here. There is root activity just starting on this plant, only just, literally in the last week or so. So what I want from this one is for this growth to mature to a proper size. Whether I'll get that or not, I don't know. And then on this growth, this other plant, it is a separate piece, I'd like a new growth to push out and again get up to a reasonable size. Both of those new growths, should they both exist, one does, the other one doesn't yet, but hopefully will do, I don't expect to bloom. These need to be a good, strong, reasonable sized plant. With a good backup of pseudo bulbs and decent sized leaves to actually bloom. And in addition to that, these are high light orchids. These do like quite a lot of light. They also would prefer not to get too hot. A lot of the Laelias come into that category. They'll put up and tolerate with the heat, but often it will slow their growth because they transpire too fast in the heat, so they lose their hydration. And if it's not replaced, then they semi-stall, shall we say. So to keep these going, they need reasonable humidity, good light, and constant hydration during growth. Yeah? And try not to get them too hot. So that's my hopes for this one. It will recover, unlike some of the Cattleyas which were actually lost. This one should recover. But it could be a couple of years before it recovers enough to actually bloom again. Because although it looks collectively like a reasonably substantial plant, it is two pieces. So it's only two half plants, yeah? You see what I mean? So it's not a substantially strong plant. It needs to get, each piece now needs to get back to something like this whole. So a couple of new growths possibly on both before we see some blooms. So that's that one. So there we go. An initial look at the group 1 plants, the first 3 in the set of 9. The update will come in 2 months' time. It'll involve those same 3 plants in the same order, and each plant will be preceded by the video clip in this video. So they'll be saved and brought forward. Yeah, so that's the way the Project Orchids are going to work this year. A lot easier for me than the previous Project Orchids, where I was taking stills of the plants and then trying to explain what they look like and from memory, and much easier with a video clip. So when we get to update 1 for group 1 in a couple of months' time, we will start with each of these video clips followed by the new video clip of the same plant. So they'll be in pairs next time round. And I hope it works. It probably doesn't feel like much of a Project Orchid set yet, because the initial look never is. But it's where we set some of the goals. It's where we look at the plants and think, what can we expect from this plant? And with your orchids, if you've got expectations, you've got not only something to look forward to, but something to monitor. You know, if you think, well, what this plant should do is this, and then you can keep your eye on it and find out if it is. And if it isn't, try and think why. What's going wrong? Not necessarily wrong. What could I change? Yeah? So as we go along, we will be thinking about the seasonal care of these plants. Now, in those plants you've just seen, you've got one that's getting no care at all at the moment because it's still resting. Then you've got one that's bursting into growth that needs some work done to help that growth proceed as best as possible. And then you've got one that's had some serious problems, and hopefully we're going to recover this year and get it to grow much better. So a variety of plants, not only genera, but also their condition. And so in those three plants we've got quite a bit of variables to look forward to as the season progresses. So thanks for dropping by. Don't forget, do the old subscribe and the thumbs up stuff, and I'll see you in the initial look for Group 2, which will follow in the not too distant future. Thanks for dropping by. Bye for now.